Hi everyone, welcome. We're expecting quite a large audience today, so we'll wait just a few seconds before everyone joins, and then we'll make a start. All right, it's 1 minute past 11. I think we'll make a start. So hello again, hello and welcome to Behavior Change and Smart Design Go Hand in Hand. This is our first webinar in a series where we look at the role of behavior change interventions in business across industry. And today we're talking about design. My name is Alexandra Juguranu. I'm from Innovate UK KTN, and in my day-to-day, I explore the role of social sciences in business. And today, I'm truly excited to partner with the Design Innovation Network to bring you this session. We have an amazing lineup of speakers, and our excellent chair today is my colleague, Dr. Abby Hurd, and she leads the Design Innovation Network. So before passing on to her for the rest of the session, just a few housekeeping rules from me. You'll be aware that your audio is muted and your video is turned off, and that will be for the duration of this webinar. If you have any technical issues, drop them in the chat to Michael Foster. He is our facilitator for today. And please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions that you have for speakers. We will collate all your questions and answer as many as we have time to in the dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And as a bonus, for the 3 top voted questions in the Q&A, we're giving away a copy of the design of Everyday Things. So please make sure you ask questions and you upvote your favorite questions and engage with the other people in the audience today. The session is being recorded, and a recording and any additional material will be distributed to you in due course. And that's it for me. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking part in this session. I hope you really enjoy it. And Abby, over to you.
Thanks, Alexandra. Thanks so much. It's such a pleasure to be able to host this session. I'm looking forward to learning more about the topic and to hearing from our speakers. We've got 4 great speakers today. They're buddying up to bring us 2 presentations. So I'm looking forward to hearing from them and to asking them some questions later on. We've had so much interest in this session, and I can really understand why. I think influence and behaviour change is so pivotal to where we are heading as a society in terms of things that are really essential for our survival, things like education, health, well-being, energy and resource use. Behaviour change has got such a big part to play in all that. And if we as an organisation want to be connecting for positive change, we need to be really connecting for behaviour change. It's a big part in what we are trying to do. So I think, yeah, that the audience looking at who's in the attendee list will know better than most that a lot of design, many aspects of design are about provoking a specific response in the user, whether that's careful consideration of things like affordances, like the book that we're giving away today talks about, or stimulating desire for products through things like aesthetics and finishing, or whether it's about creating identity around a brand or a sense of belonging and ownership. Design and behaviour go hand in hand. But I think behaviour change can be a bit more than that, really intentionally provoking a response, getting under the skin, understanding psychology and altering and nudging habits for good or for bad. So as innovators and designers, as part of this community, we've got a responsibility to think about the consequences of what we put out into the world, and the effect we have on people's behaviour is one of those big considerations. It is an example of where design can be really powerful, and as usual, it's often at its best when it goes unnoticed, when it nudges things quietly and instigates long-lasting and sometimes really disruptive change. So yeah, I'm increasingly like aware of all the technology that's in the world and how it is being used to address some of the crisis that we're facing. But I think more and more I'm aware of how design has got a really big role to play there, maybe even more so than the technology itself, and how really respectful and careful design and the form and the function, and importantly, where things fit, where our technology fits and interacts with other systems, so systems like people and planet, really has a role to play in our future. So yeah, the role of design is definitely foundational to Innovate UK's strategy, and it's a key part of the plan for action, and it's integral to Innovate UK KTN's ambitions for effective innovation. So today we're going to hear two stories of design and behaviour change, just two examples of how it might be employed. So if you're keen to share your own examples, we're going to open up a discussion forum on Design Hive after the event, which is an online platform. I think we can put the link into the chat that will allow us to continue this conversation outside this hour-long event. So as well as sharing questions in this session, if you drop your questions in the Q&A, we'll pick those up in the chat if we don't get to cover them today. So let's get on with it. I'll hand over to our speakers. So we have two presentations to begin. The first is quite technically focused around the development of products, and the second is about change in an organisation. So our first two speakers, I'm really pleased to introduce. They're amongst the most collaborative and helpful people I've worked with during my time at KTN, especially when I first joined the organisation. So Census and Filament Product Design are organisations that focus on collaboration and connection, not just of people and supply chains, but of technologies, and really specifically Internet of Things. So our first speaker was one of the first people I met when I joined KTN, when I was in the manufacturing team. He's generous with his knowledge and full of insights, and he's founder and director at one of Glasgow's top product design agencies. They're a consultancy that are focused on seamlessly integrating technologies into people's lives, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from him. So first speaker is Craig Lynn, co-founder and director at Filament Product Design. And our second speaker alongside Craig is CEO at Census, which is one of Scotland's innovation centres, and an organisation who have been supportive of innovation and community building and are really well aligned with the KTN ethos of connecting people for positive change. So he's also expertly insightful and generous with all things technology related, and he sits on a number of prestigious boards, including one at APSRC and Scottish Government. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Craig and Paul for our first presentation today.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Abby. Thank you very much for the introduction. Just checking that everyone can see my slides. Are we good? Thumbs up, please, everyone. Perfect. Yeah, so as Abby says, my name is Craig from Filament, and I'll be joined in this kind of presentation by Paul from Census. So, why can I look at, from a design point of view, look at behavioural change? And certainly when you're looking at big world challenges, the thing that comes back to is people are habitual. We've got thousands of years of evolution which has formed people's behaviour. So what we always say is that user behaviour often flows the path of least resistance, and that's it's not always what you assume to be. So there's techniques in terms of interviewing users to understand, but also kind of observation, because it's often what people do, not what they say, which is of real value. So now design technology can be used as interventions along this path, and what that can do is it can kind of alter that kind of behaviour. But as I said, people are habitual. It's almost like a kind of a sine wave. It will kind of go back down to their standard pattern. Great design is closed loop, however. So it's about kind of employing these interventions and then looking and observing how they affect people and create kind of new habits. And it's really in designing that as a kind of closed loop element. And as Abby says, myself and Paul, we develop a lot of IoT, a lot of smart products, which kind of give you the information and data back into kind of analysing that. And the goal is that you know, effectively you're wanting to kind of shift behaviours to be kind of more positive in terms of people and planet. So then you start kind of introducing and designing these interventions. You start testing them with user bases out in the wild, and you start analysing that data and understanding what kind of new behaviours and new shifts of patterns that you've introduced. This is quite a pretty kind of simplistic look at it. But when you look at it under the kind of lens of, you know, human-centric design, so, you know, human-centric design is you trying to kind of balance out and hit the sweet spot in the Venn diagram of, you know, desirability, everything from user experience, industrial design, feasibility, everything from the kind of technology point of view, what the technology does, what data you get, what can you feed back, and looking at it from a viability point of view as well. So this is not only kind of commercial viability, you know, more and more we talk about this as environmental viability. So when you start to kind of look at behaviour change, you know, these interventions that I talked before become even more complex. You know, you can start to have interventions that are user-based, interventions that are technology-based, and even interventions that are wider market and commercial-based. So it really starts to kind of complicate the picture, and it's, as I say, it's about kind of employing a kind of an iterative design process. You know, we always talk about think, make, break, repeat. So, you know, what is your hypothesis of the intervention, what it may do to the user group? Okay, what is the easiest way to get a prototype or get something in the hands of users? And as I say, observe their reaction as opposed to kind of ask them for how to change that. Break it. Ultimately, what we're looking to do is seeing to put these interventions to a stress point to fully understand with extreme users and understand extreme conditions, when it works, when it doesn't work, and then repeat. As I say, it's that iterative process where you're looking, you're testing, you're refining, and you're basically repeating this in a pattern until you can get a truly successful product. Now we'll talk about kind of contextualize this a bit more. We can talk about a project that both Census and Filament worked on together. So this is a Scottish startup called Behringer, and they kind of really approached both Census and ourselves to develop a smart IoT device that would go into commercial building spaces and be able to kind of inform the building owners with a lot of information about how people are using that building. So I guess I'll kind of hand over to the initial introduction came via Census, who kind of worked on a kind of feasibility study. So I'll hand over to Paul here to give a bit more of background information about where the idea came from and the different kind of interventions across this project that helped kind of inform where it is just now.
Thanks, Craig. Good morning, everybody, and thanks ever so much for joining us today. In terms of sort of my background, I run Census, one of the innovation centres in Scotland. So we're focused on sensing, imaging, but the area that we're probably most well known for is the way in which we've embraced Internet of Things. So anything which has got the word smart in front of it as a precursor, generally we've had our hands in it in some way. In terms of just a little bit of background context, Census as an organisation is probably best in the quadrant on the chart that everybody tells you not to go into. So it's new product, new market. And when you think about that positioning within the context of design, I think there's some important considerations that need to come out. So what I'm going to try and do over the next few minutes is talk to some of the technical or engineering aspects of Behringer and the solution which was actually sort of developed for them. And actually try and sort of put that in the context of design and how the knowledge that was gained has allowed Behringer as a company to actually sort of move on. In terms of sort of if you could move on to the next chart, please, Craig. In terms of the sort of the company themselves, Behringer was founded by a pair of surveyors. That's actually sort of quite interesting to me as a technologist, because actually what they had was a very clear vision of a product. So this was all about how could they increase asset utilization. Originally, it was a concept that was developed for the National Health Service, the NHS, and more recently, as I'll talk about in a few moments, it's pivoted into other applications. But what was really important is that they had a very, very clear vision of what they wanted to do to improve asset optimization. And that was very much about localization, real-time information about utilization of assets. But importantly, and from my point of view at Sensis, is that they actually had no idea about how that product could be realized. So it was vision with actually very much a blank sheet of paper. In terms of what we actually did in the first stage, we actually sort of moved very, very quickly from understanding their vision, beginning to develop a set of requirements or a set of needs. And we actually put together a proof of concept system for them really very, very quickly. And that was really the sort of the first technology intervention we developed. It certainly, as a piece of design, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't intended to be pretty, but what it was intended to do was to deliver and demonstrate the functionality. So how could you monitor assets in a room? How could you monitor the number of people in a room? And then how could you communicate that to the users of that facility to allow them to make better decisions? What it actually allowed Behringer as a company to do was to engage with users and investors to say, this is the functionality we're looking to develop within the company. And from that, there were a number of successful steps taken, particularly in acquisition of new business. And what's really important here is we were truly in that new sector. A couple of aspects which were really important from the design and implementation is that it was really evident from us from a very early stage that this particular solution could be used much more widely than intended. So we actually wrote in a couple of requirements, particularly with respect to cyber resilience and also privacy. The actual solution itself is based on a very wide angle of fisheye lens in the ceiling. It's actually imaging an area, but it's actually processing the information. It's using quite a sophisticated level of machine learning, which we might want to come back to in the questions, because that certainly aided the sort of the functionality of this particular system. As a result of those interventions, what we've managed to do subsequently is support Behringer in terms of new applications. So it moved from an NHS application into a commercial real estate application. Importantly, in the early stages of COVID-19, we actually repurposed the Behringer device, and it was actually used to monitor physical separation in some manufacturing areas, again, as a way of actually demonstrating that that manufacturer was complying with some of the COVID regulations at the time. So what was really important here was actually how we took a vision, how we actually built out the requirements with breadth, and then how we could actually get to a point where there was something tangible which Behringer could use to actually progress their business, both in terms of the sales, but in terms of the investment. If you can move on to the next chart, please, Craig.
That's the final one.
That's the one, sorry. Where I wanted to sort of finish on this one is actually the experience we gained with Behringer and the working relationship that Sensis has actually built with Filament. There was a repeated path beginning to appear, which was actually Sensis would do the early stage proof of concept. The company we were working with would generally go away and they'd secure some form of investment. Then they'd go to Filament PD as a product design house, and they would actually complete the next stage of the product. The previous chart actually showed the finished product, which Filament, thanks Craig, which Filament had actually developed. One of the things that we've done most recently, and again, this links back in quite nicely back into the subject, is this wasn't a single encounter. We've worked with a number of product design houses. I know Filament have worked with a number of technology partners. But one of the things that we realized is actually we'd got a number of positive experiences where we'd done this on a ad hoc basis, and what could we do to actually sort of begin to sort of build a more regular capability here in terms of that technical product development, product design. And that was really the sort of the foundations to what we created jointly with the Smart Things Accelerator, or STAC. I'll drop the link for STAC into the chat, but I think that's a really good example of where we're trying to embody some of the design principles. If I could hand back to you now, Abby.
If I can just jump in on a quick point there, I think one of the interesting things on this project is that balancing, going back to that Venn diagram, balancing the commercial aspects with the technology and the kind of usability part. And I guess from a softer kind of design intervention piece, the concept of the device was effectively putting live recording of video recordings, so almost kind of semi Big Brother-esque, into the ceilings of offices, and there was an interesting challenge in that piece. Effectively, as Paul said, the device itself was processing all that information on board, so it wasn't sending anything out other than some kind of metadata, so no one was able to kind of hack into it, no one was able to kind of access it. However, so that led to the kind of design decisions of, do you hide the camera or do you keep it in plain sight? So that was an interesting intervention, because if you hide the camera, it's almost then you're not being transparent with that design, and you're not having the physical embodiment echo what the technology is doing as well. So there was a kind of a decision made to actually make the camera lens actually visible on the device itself, so you're not hiding anything, and just kind of educate those kind of users into what's happening behind the scenes to kind of protect them. And I guess that's fast forwarding to more of a kind of changes post-COVID. As Paul says, this concept was dreamt up about optimizing your space and your building assets and tracking it, predominantly from a cost-saving point of view. But the world we're in nowadays, people are starting to look to this technology to do a bit of an audit for space, so that you're actually getting kind of carbon savings from cutting down office space as opposed to just cost savings. So it's I would say that some of the softer elements of that kind of the intervention have kind of helped this product become kind of successful, and it's a product for good, as opposed to a CCTV camera that's going to be checking on every time you go to the toilet break or you go and make a cup of coffee. So I think that's an interesting point to bring up in some of the kind of the softer aspects of design and how that can help.
I think the other aspect about it, Craig, is as well as the sort of the imaging sensor, the camera on it, it's actually got a suite of environmental sensors as well, so it will do temperature, humidity, CO2, volatiles, etc. And certainly when we were doing some early trials in a GP surgery, you could begin to determine a raft of really quite useful information from that. So you could actually determine that within a GP's consulting room, there were multiple people there. What you actually detected on some occasions was a spike on the volatile sensor. And what that was actually indicating is that the GP was about to do a physical examination and were actually sanitizing their hands. So actually an awful lot of data was being generated about the workflow of the process from quite a simple, actually a very elegant solution.
Okay, thanks both. Really great presentation and lovely natural discussion at the end there as well. Thanks for that. Yeah, really enjoying seeing everybody sharing what they're up to in the chat as well. Thanks for being so open and contributing to the discussion in that way. And also we've got some great questions coming in through the Q&A. So if you'd like to see some of those answered, please upvote the ones that you're most interested in, because I think we're going to be quite tight for time. I don't think we're going to get through them all. So our next two speakers are absolutely bursting with infectious enthusiasm and energy for their subject. They've recently graduated from the Royal College of Art, which, if you don't know already, is the world's top design school. They both have master's degrees in service design, but none of them are sort of fresh out the wrapper. They're both pretty experienced when it comes to design and behaviour change. They've got lots of insight and experience the results in design that really makes a tangible difference. So our first speaker graduated in fashion design. They've got an MSc in computer science. They've won a BBC award for journalism, and as well as having the MA in service design from the Royal College of Art. She also runs a socially conscious design agency with the mission of empowering women and other underrepresented groups. So we're very pleased to have Linda Matunga here today to share some of her MA work with us. And Linda works on her project with her colleague and our other final speaker, also an RCA graduate in service design, who has amazing interdisciplinary experience designing for organisational change and behaviour change in healthcare, finance and housing sectors. Verdi Agrawala is currently a service designer at Darlington Service Design Labs, a research and design charity which is concerned with improving the lives of children and young people. So I really love that these two speakers are so passionate about encouraging other people through their work. So Linda and Verdi, over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Abigail. It's really nice to meet you all. Just a word of note, we'll be speaking about a project we recently completed, but due to both of us being abroad, we might have to switch off our cameras, and we also apologize in advance in case there's a lag. Thank you. So welcome to our presentation today. As Abby mentioned, we are Linda and Vridi, and we're graduates from the Royal College of Art. Our practice is actually called service design, and is about applying design practices and methods to solve problems, ideate and improve services. Today, we're here to share about how service design can be applied for organizational culture and behavior change. We would far most like to thank Dr. Clive Grenier and Nicholas Robato from the Royal College of Art for their support throughout this project. On the agenda for today, we share about how we discovered barriers to sustainability, defined the problem and defined a direction of focus, developed and tested various prototypes, which led to solutions. We will also share our ongoing pilot with NHSBT in Cambridge. We use the double diamond to guide the process. This framework of divergent and convergent to discover, define, develop and deliver was developed by the Design Council. The UK government has set a target to reach net zero by 2050, which will require large-scale transitions by organisations in the UK and major infrastructure decisions to implement these changes. NHSBT Blood and Transplant aims to go net zero by 2040. We collaborate with them on this challenge. National Health Service for Blood and Transplant, also known as NHSBT, manages donations, storage, and transportation of blood, organs, and stem cells. The special health authority that provides their services nationally. NHSBT's new mission is to save more lives, which includes safeguarding the environment. NHSBT plans to reduce carbon emissions by 100%. To date, they've reached a 50% carbon reduction, along with other sustainability goals. Together with the environmental team, we agreed to start with exploring potential barriers to achieving net zero, which included looking at sustainable behaviours and habits, leading to being connected to NHSBT estate and facility teams who manage the NHSBT centres across the country, while occupiers are NHSBT estates working within these buildings managed by estates. To better understand the ecosystem, we created Stakeholder Map, a service design methodology. This helped us to understand the different relationship dynamics between teams. By looking at how the teams work together, we understood their roles, responsibilities, and communication channels. As you can see here, the environmental team works with estates by instructing, advising, and auditing their work. Estates accept, act, and report, while occupiers adopt the norms. We used ethnography and other qualitative methods to understand how estate teams and NHSBT employees function, use space. Moreover, their relationship with the built environment. We also did interviews, co-creation workshops that unlocked key learnings and opportunity areas. Through this process, we arrived at 3 key learnings. The first, although people knew what sustainability was and cared about it, they struggled to adopt sustainable practices into daily actions. This was because sustainability was abstract and not relatable to them. Secondly, NHSBT staff are doing critical work, so their company culture is process-driven to prevent errors, which means that any sustainability initiative we created needed to work in tandem with the existing work culture. Thirdly, Communication and recognition efforts on sustainability were not well received. Therefore, we needed to find the balance between creating a solution that was relatable, yet complement the existing work culture. We made mindset personas to understand their employees. For instance, seeds are reserved and hardworking. They aim for perfection and clarity in their jobs. They find work, purpose in their work, and aspire for leadership and skill development. They cope by working at home, while advocates are systematic and diplomatic. They build rapport and trust by making themselves known. They aspire to set examples through their work and cope by not engaging in personal relationships. This then followed with mapping out our mindset persona would respond to new initiatives. This helped us understand the threshold and challenges we could face. We created a how might we statement to guide the process. A how might we statement helps us reframe our insights and problems into opportunity areas and stops us from solutionalizing. It supports creative ideation with a key goal. For us, it was, how might we create a service proposition that empowers NHSBT estate teams to learn, co-create, and implement a sustainable culture within their estates, so that sustainability is relatable and relevant for employees. We identified estate team as an entry point, given their drive to improve workplace culture and their unique relationship with occupiers. Here you can see our estate teams have used placemaking to improve the work environment. Sustainability is critical, but to make it happen means it needs to be tangible. For that, it needs to be relatable. Therefore, our strategic approach into the problem was to explore behavior and cultural elements of the organization. By engaging with the people, understanding the culture, and key touch points, we can change the behaviors and therefore the culture towards sustainability. To guide the process, we also followed 3 principles. The next step of the process was to prototype and test possible solutions. We used methodologies and frameworks from service design, semiotics, and behavior change to guide this phase. In service design, behavior change is usually required to improve services. We chose signage to nudge behaviors and make sustainability tangible. We realized that NHSBT estates function with signs since they help occupiers navigate the space by providing rules of how to behave, to perform a particular action, and for safety. Signage was expected by occupiers, contractors, and owners. In particular, it instructed them on navigating unfamiliar spaces safely. We referred to nudge theory to guide the process of prototype testing, as well as the EAST framework to validate whether prototypes were easy, attractive, social, and timely, and therefore worthy testing. With this, our vision was to create a service that enabled SD teams to deal with fast and conscious sustainable issues and long-term sustainability adaptation. System 1 is fast and reactive. For NHSBT SD teams, the challenges are people not switching off plugs or closing windows, whereas System 2 is deliberate and slow, and the challenge is raising awareness and nurturing a sustainability culture over time. We created a prototyping schedule. First, we justified before testing, learning, and adapting. Given the red tape in testing at NHSBT estates, we identified an estate with similar hurdles. In this case, we found the RCA estates also struggled with similar occupier behaviors and communication challenges. We divided our test into multiple phases. First, to learn what images, colors, and fonts incite action. Secondly, to learn whether signages work. Thirdly, to test alternative materials. And lastly, to test different types of engagement mechanisms. First, we ask if sustainability images worked. In the first prototype, we use a method of choice, which guides users between 2 options. The aim was to see what type of images work. We tested in busy corridors over 24 hours. In science and semiotics, red incites action. True to form, people were more responsive to the red room. Dystopic images, although popular in media, garnered a negative response. Some were even taken down. Key learnings, the right imagery guides the process. Instructive signs tell occupiers what to do and require some conscious effort. Key learnings here were aesthetics matters. Time is required to adapt since occupiers need to understand why the signs are there. Another key learning was, whilst we were trying to change occupier behavior, compliance checks required staff to turn lights and test them daily. This presented an opportunity to consider compliance checks in our work. We reiterated the signs based on occupiers' feedback. RC estate reported improved behavior later on. This showed how important co-creation was for designing assets that would support sustainable behavior change. Textile signage set out to disrupt people's automatic habits and make them aware of their actions over a week. Textile was found to be effective in deterring use. The key findings here was, for signage to be useful, it needed to be created by its occupiers and given meaning by them. In doing so, it could help change behaviors and adjust sustainability culture over time. We realized this insight would help estate teams to develop signage that works. And for us, it was important to share this knowledge through the service we delivered.
NHSBT occupiers did not respond enough to sustainability communication sent by estate teams. So we prototyped alternative engagement methods to see if these were effective. Ballot boxes, posters, QR codes did not receive engagement. Since we did not receive the response that we expected, we began to reflect on NHSBT communications. We looked at how we fitted into the system and were told to communicate. We found visits and calls were most effective with estate teams. This was true between occupiers and estate teams. On both visits, we had seen people come directly to estate teams to ask for what they want. We also met people who had a general banter with estate teams and realized that these types of conversations could only develop over time and through continuous engagement. It became clear that NHSBT estate teams and occupiers want to interact face-to-face. We picked a framework by NBS, which is proven to be effective in embedding sustainability in organizational culture, and used it to explore solutions based on our persona's work motivations. This framework has 4 pillars: fostering commitment, clarity of expectations, building momentum, and instilling capacity for change. On mapping under these pillars, we realized that engagement needs were different for the personas. For instance, in clarity of expectations, a seed would want to know how they can develop skills for progression versus an advocate might want to know how they can have leadership and influence over work. So we learned that this framework would be effective to enable NHSBT employees to define communication and recognition for their sustainability efforts. Based on our research and prototyping, we created Soft Systems, a unique service that embeds sustainability into organizational culture. At its heart are people who drive sustainability. Soft Systems is a 6 to 12 months pilot that helps estate teams and organizations embed a culture of sustainability in their estate. Our unique entry point is to understand occupier behavior and change it towards sustainable ones. Estate teams and occupiers are taken on a process of co-creation that makes sustainability relevant and relatable, and empowers estates to take ownership of the pilot. Additionally, we help estate teams tailor communication and recognition efforts to the personas in their estate. So how does this work? Our journey is divided into 3 phases. Identify aims to uncover issues through research. Addressing and testing aims to develop and test assets through co-creation. And formalize aims to embed sustainable processes by formalizing what works. This process may take 6 to 12 months, depending on the size of the estate, budget of the client, and their appetite for involvement. So, Soft Systems provides value to estates and occupiers through improved relationship management and to organizations by lowering risk of failure of sustainability investments. For us, we increase knowledge generation. Before closing, we share our pilot with NHSBT in Cambridge. We held regular meetings with the estate team to keep them updated on our research and development. We also co-created a workshop with them so that it met their occupiers' needs. Participants were receptive to the workshop activities, which included persona and signage activities. What helped is occupiers could relate to and identify the personas within their own estates. They came up with grounded examples of communication and recognition that would work for the persona in their estates. We shared our insights from our prototype testing so our workshop participants understood what works. They used these learnings creatively in their signages. One said, "The weird-looking googly eyes will make people talk to each other." They also wanted to use textures in non-lab spaces and said that could be cleaned through spraying during regular cleaning. Only testing will validate this. At current, we are still addressing and testing. Some objectives of the roadmap are setting realistic metrics and scheduling for testing to measure success. So the key learnings for us were sustainability is not one solution. Behavior change requires collaboration, and the process is just as important as the solution. Before closing, will share what NHSBT estate teams had to say. Sorry about the confusion with the screens. Thank you so much for bearing with us and for your time today. If you'd like to learn more about our work or about service design, feel free to contact us on the email shared on the screen. Thank you.
Thanks, Rudy. Thanks, Linda. Yeah, really interesting presentation. Thanks for sharing your work with us. So it is now time for Q&A. We've got loads of questions in the Q&A. If you want to add some more, we will be taking the questions onto our online platform so we can pick them up afterwards, because there's no way we're going to get through them. But do feel free to upvote some questions if there's ones that you definitely want answered. In my mind at the moment, we're going to start with Ben Griffin's question. I think it's an interesting one and it's quite broad. It'll warm our panelists up nicely. And then we'll maybe come to Nigel's question around ethics and Stephen's question around democratic issues. So yeah, Ben's question, just to kick off, about designers being champions of people in the innovation process and really understanding the human motivations, perceptions and behaviour. How much do the methods employed by designers, these sorts of human-centred methods in the research phases of a project, differ from those used by behavioural scientists, and what can the disciplines learn from one another? Should more design teams include behavioural scientists? Who'd like to pick that one up? Paul, can we come to you? Can I put you on the spot?
I was hoping you'd not do that, but I'll do my best, Abby, on that one. I think in terms of, so part of the work that Census does is actually sort of engaging with universities and academic institutions. I think on many occasions you actually sort of look at some of the research which is emerging and think actually what would really benefit this research is actually a much stronger engagement with design elements, and actually how would this be perceived? How can you actually enhance it? And I think actually there is a gap there. Many of the research programs we see don't really address that. I think the other aspect is much more towards the practicality of it. So when I spoke, for example, I spoke about a young company raising investment and progressing on their journey. On many occasions, the resources to support more design intervention are simply not there. So I think it's a question about how could we actually share good best principles, good practice, how can we actually engage sensibly and begin to sort of create an on-ramp. So I think it's about awareness and creating that on-ramp. I'll probably stop now, Abby, because I'm waffling.
No, nice answer, Paul. Does anybody else have anything to contribute to that? Craig, you've unmuted.
Yeah, I think it's the way that we always kind of talk about processes in kind of 4 stages. The first 2 being probably the most important is your kind of discover and design. And your discover is when you really need to be making sure that you're designing the right thing. So that's when I do find that tying in with experts across a wide range of different sectors and getting as many voices involved in that. We've been working on a number of projects recently that are looking at behavioural change education within multi-generational education and physical products as a way of kind of introducing gamification and play. So teaching families about better saving habits, teaching families about better environmental habits, and how can you use a physical product and a kind of digital play element to it to foster that. And 100%, yeah, a lot of the early work we did was in trying to pull in as much from research, as much from behavioural psychology, as much from the gaming industry, and just trying to kind of piece that all together under the design process to make sure that before we start actually prototyping and testing things, we have a good understanding of what we should be prototyping and testing and looking for.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, Linda, Rudy, from a sort of methodology and methods point of view, do you think there's much overlap between sort of behavioural sciences and design?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think both design and behavior change, they add their own richness to what we are trying to do. And behavior change, especially behavior science, it's a field in itself and it needs to be dealt with care. So design is all about bringing in context and understanding the problem, what's going on. And when we try and understand the problem, you uncover how people behave. But bringing in experts from behavior science and bringing in that knowledge from there will help us understand why those behaviors are happening and how do we ethically deal with them, and also help us design, make more sense, and also design for our testing or learn from what we are actually testing, learn more from our insights. So I wouldn't say overlap, but there needs to be almost like a strategic level of design that needs to go into how you even design your process of learning and responding.
Yeah, thanks for that, Freddie. Really nicely put. Paul, we come back to you.
Yeah, it was just, Abby, just to add a little bit more and looking at some of the questions in the chat. Certainly when I spoke very much from a needs or requirements led. So you've got a clear need, and Craig touched on those points with the interaction. The majority of our work actually sort of falls into that category, but actually a reasonable percentage, I'm probably talking sort of maybe 15, 20% of our work is actually what you'd recognize as technology push. So something which is actually emerging, there's no requirement for it, but you've got the potential to do something differently. I think the whole user engagement, when you've got a technology push occasion, that probably needs to be considered as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Let's move on to Nigel's question, just got an eye on the time. So how do we manage the ethics of this, of implementing behaviour change? I think you touched on it a little bit, Craig and Paul, in your presentation. How do we balance that, the ethics of it, with things like the commercial interests and objectives? Linda?
I think a big thing is down to who's developing the product and what their kind of core values and mission is within that. And I think that's where it has to start. And what you're finding is a lot of design for climate and design for sustainability right now. We had greenwashing 10 years ago and it's not gone away. People are still using it as a way to market and increase their market share, as opposed to actually doing it from a kind of good point of view. And I think that you always have kind of issues within that. I think, yeah, you need to kind of make sure that when we're working a project, that we talk about having positive impact on people on the planet. And if it doesn't do that, then do you really need something new? Or do you really need a new product? So yeah, I think the first question you should really ask is, should you be doing it as opposed to jumping in?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, whether we're talking about behaviour change or just any sort of innovation and product development. Is it actually needed? That's a good point, Craig. Linda, I noticed you unmuted yourself. Do you want to contribute?
Yeah, I think especially in the service design practice, sort of like the intentions of actually creating the service or product is something that we really think about. So, okay, you're creating this service, but what is the underlying factors behind that decision? And what behavior change are you actually trying to incite? And also the other thing we have to consider is it's the people, you're trying to change people's behavior. Are the people buying into this idea as well? And the other thing is, how do you actually help them to be part of this journey? In terms of sustainability, what we have found in our work is you can only start with sustainability. Okay, it's something that's really effective if you start with where people actually are, and then you work with them from that point on together. Another thing is, because also, people who are providing the services also have their own sort of like behavior habits and their own sort of like mindsets as well. So it's also thinking about how do you actually help them be part of this process as well. So you look at a holistic perspective. So you look at everybody involved in sort of like the product or service being created and how you can actually do something together. So I think, especially from a designer's perspective, it's always the idea of what is good is something that has to be defined by everybody who's going to be involved in that service or product itself. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, just picking up on that sustainability stuff, like it seems like a given that we want to nudge people towards good practice with things like recycling and energy use. But who decides what's good? what are the democratic issues that need to be considered, and what sort of, who decides what response or behaviour change we're trying to promote?
There's a part of it in terms of the user acceptance, and certainly one of the things that we look quite closely for, who are those early advocates, those early champions who could actually sort of take, certainly from my perspective, technological solutions into that first stage deployment, and actually what are their metrics, what are they looking for, both in terms of the hard metrics, but also the much softer metrics as well. I think this is a really interesting topic for the future. So one of the things that I think is happening from my perspective, increases in AI, increase in machine learning, that actually makes the outcomes much simpler to engage with. So again, from a design perspective, that balance between simplicity of outcome, AI, the ethics, I think there's a really interesting sort of trade space in the middle there, Abby, for the future that is really worth watching, and trying to get some experiences around both negative and positive.
Yeah, the timing of what you're saying is really interesting. We've been having conversations around exactly that internally, so maybe worth picking up. And if anybody else has got a contribution to that, we'd be keen to hear from you.
Interesting things is kind of who decides it. There's a debate part of COP26, and it was around who is better prepared to introduce and meet net zero targets, a democratic society or an autocratic society, and autocratic won by a long shot. And I think it was more the action was, the time has passed for just discussing and keeping things theoretical. We need action. So sometimes you need that stick rather than the carrot, and you just need, as I said, to do something better at, learn from it, and then progress that again. And I think that there's an element of certainly, you do need to just be acting on it. We need to be learning from it, and we need to be doing things that have a positive impact. And then, okay, it may not be the best solution, but if it improves it slightly, then we're going down at least the right path.
Thanks for that, Craig. I'm just looking at the questions. There's so many questions. We're definitely going to put these online. One sort of final question. I think Paul's touched on it a little bit around machine learning and AI. Where do you think the big opportunities for design and behaviour change are in sort of shaping our future? So either in terms of sector, in terms of design approaches, or societal challenges that we're facing. Has anybody got thoughts?
I think there's a really good opportunity in the built environment, Abby. So how do we live? How do we consume energy? How do we minimize our consumption of energy? How do we actually sort of interrelate functions into that? One of the things which we were looking at recently was actually the whole concept of smart rural. And the assumption we started from is actually it's a more tractable early stage deployment, easier to implement. But one of the things which actually sort of surprised me as we were working through that, and again, I've got my technologist hat on, is actually the need for human interaction. And actually, what does that look like? So I think the balance of how do we live more efficiently, how do we live more environmentally acceptable, but also how do we deliver our broader needs as humans into that. So human contact being one.
From my perspective, I think especially after COVID-19, a lot of people have sort of like reflecting about sort of like their daily actions and how they move forward in life. So I can definitely see sort of like behavior change and design methodologies being a really big opportunity in the back-end sector. So people are really thinking about how do I improve sort of like my saving habits, how do I save for a rainy day and so forth. Another thing as well is health technology. I think especially with COVID-19, it's made us very aware of sort of like our surroundings and how we live our lives. So I can definitely see this like being very prominent in that sector as well. Yeah.
I'm moving away from sector because I agree with everything that Paul and Linda said. I also feel like it's trying to think about the integrated approach that we take in design and bringing in those different disciplines and try and advance how we are taking integrated approach in order to tackle those challenges that are coming up in the banking sector or in the built environment, because they are really complex problems and systems itself change behavior over time. And hence, I think there's also a lot of opportunity in figuring that side of the puzzle out.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's some real potential to kind of use tools like AI and big data within the actual design process. You know, the thing that's always limiting when you're designing something new is you're limited by your user group. You're limited by how many people you can get testing, which often causes kind of certain bias within some of the design decisions. So, you know, if you could have a tool that was able to integrate, you know, a whole host of different users from different backgrounds, different, you know, and be able to kind of test, you know, it's kind of generatively test design ideas and hypotheses against that, then it'd be quite an interesting and powerful tool for developing new products.
Yeah, thanks for that, Craig. We've literally got 2 minutes left, but Sarah's also asked a really interesting question, which kind of builds on that point about, you know, like why are we so quick to dismiss what people say? For example, when we're doing design, do designers also consider alternatives to the behavioural paradigm? Any thoughts?
I guess you know, from seeing what people in an interview scenario tend to not represent themselves fully within that. So I think that you always kind of be mindful of what people say, but then the observation piece isn't generally when you get to see a little bit kind of more transparency. So it's both are equally as important. But I think if you can have them in isolation, you're not getting the full picture.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up there for the live question. Sorry, Linda, I can see you're itching to say something else. If you're super quick, go for it.
Yeah, I'm just going to say one methodology we use in service design is customer journey maps. So that actually really helps sort of like understand their actions on a day-to-day basis, and also their emotional reactions as well. So sometimes people do say one thing and that's what they advocate that they were doing on a day-to-day basis, and their daily actions do sort of like change a little bit. And I think as designers, it's sort of like we need to understand both aspects and find a balance between the two. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah, we're going to have to end it there. The questions will be on our platform to continue the conversation. Love all the chat and people letting everybody know what they're up to. Yeah, finally, just thank you, Alex, for letting us run this session on design. Thank you to ESRC for sort of coming up with the idea and pushing it forward. And massive thank you to our speakers, to Paul, to Craig, to Vriddy, and to Linda. Thank you very much. Thank you to the audience as well. Great questions and so much going on in the chat. Thank you.